What is going on, everyone? I am back, and week two officially in the books, which means we are getting ready for week three already. And the first thing to do is look at that waiver wire target, and that's exactly what I'm going to give you guys because I've got my personal list of top 10 guys you should be targeting for week three. And in no particular order, but a quick disclaimer since we did have a lot of tight end injuries in week two, you're going to see that bias a little bit in this list. But with that being said, let's get right into it. So, first on my list, I have got Chris Carson, the rookie running back for the Seahawks. And surprisingly, he led all of the runners, and that includes Rawls, Lacey, and Procise in touches. Lacey wasn't even active, and Carson's final stat line was 20 carries for 93 yards, a reception also for 7 yards. And I find this a little bit surprising. I thought Rawls would take over that backfield, but that is not the case. Carson has looked good in the past 2 weeks, and I think it's safe to say that role is his now for the being, unless some kind of injury comes along. So he would actually probably be my personal top waiver wire target for this week. And you've seen before when the Seahawks have had a running back they can rely on, that is the number one guy. They have had success, whether it be Rawls or Lynch in the past. Not saying Carson is going to be one of those guys, but it does help when you have one particular running back that you focus on. And I do think that Chris Carson will be that guy for the Seahawks. Moving on, I've got another Seattle player in mind, and that is Tyler Lockett. He had 6 receptions for 64 yards, and we all know that he is a dangerous weapon as well in the special teams game. And look, maybe he got a little bit of a boost because Jimmy Graham was out, a little nicked up, but I still liked Lockett. He looked good. He had the same amount of receptions as Doug Baldwin. Doug Baldwin hasn't looked that great. That's not to say that people should be worried about that, but look for other guys to step up. And to me, Tyler Lockett is a guy that fits that category. They got rid of Curse, so to me, Lockett is the new wide receiver number two, and he's got the speed. He's got familiarity with Russell Wilson, so a nice little waiver wire guy that you guys should target. Next, continuing our run on receivers, I've got Devin Funchess, and maybe not a name that a lot of people will be throwing around, but for me, one of the main reasons that I've got Funchess is because of the Greg Olsen injury. And with Carolina, that was their best pass catcher in Greg Olsen. Now, I know he didn't have the targets or the yards in the first 2 games, but that was an abnormality. He got hurt early in week two. He's going to be out with a broken foot 6 to 8 weeks. So I like Funchess to take his spot. Kelvin Benjamin, obviously still the number one guy there, but Funchess, he's a big guy, similar to Olsen. He had 4 receptions for 68 yards. Cam likes to go to him deep as well. That shows with the stat line. And I think he will get a boost with Greg Olsen being out there. I don't anticipate the backup in Ed Dickson to be that serviceable. He'll get a couple dinks and dumps, but to me, Devin Funchess becomes the next guy up. And I do think, especially in leagues with 12 or 14 teams, he is a nice little pickup to get, and I think he will be a nice addition while Greg Olsen is out. Speaking of tight ends, I've got my first tight end to this list, and that is Benjamin Watson. Now, the more I think about it, the more I come to the conclusion that Watson and Flacco have the most familiarity together out of those guys in Baltimore. He went for 8 receptions, 91 yards, which is a very good stat line, albeit it was against a weak Cleveland defense, but still, he is that security blanket for Joe Flacco. You know, Macklin is still trying to figure things out. Wallace is more of that home run hitter. So I like some of those dink and dumps to add up for Benjamin Watson. And again, probably not owned in many of your leagues. I think he could potentially be a nice fill-in role for a guy like Greg Olsen or someone like that. So go ahead, try and get Benjamin Watson. Probably won't duplicate this stat line again, but I think he is a threat to get a touchdown in future games, even if it is with fewer receptions and fewer yards. Next, going back to our running backs, I have got Chris Thompson of the Redskins, and he had himself a night because he had 3 attempts for 77 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then 3 receptions for 29 yards as well. Now, a lot of this is because Kelly got hurt, and it was a rib injury. Personally, I think he'll be back next Sunday night. It seemed like a bruise, something like that, not too serious. So that'll devalue Thompson a little bit. But in case he is not, I think Chris Thompson becomes a very nice option, at least for this week, for those guys that are streaming, maybe flex players or a little bit tight. Chris Thompson should be available in most leagues. He can both catch and run the ball, especially in Kelly's absence. You saw he had a nice night. Um, a little bit of inflated stat line because of the 2 touchdowns. That's not going to happen every single time. And even more impressive is he did that on 3 attempts. So again, another kind of red flag. But just keep in mind, while Kelly is out, especially next week, if he is out, Thompson becomes a really nice pickup to go after. Continuing, I've got J.J. Nelson of the Cardinals, and looking at a stat line, he blew up because he had 5 receptions for 120 yards and a touchdown. Now, funny enough, a guy that I was putting a lot of praise on and expectations on, and Larry Fitzgerald, didn't have the best of games, but look, this is how I think it'll be for the Cardinals receiver. There's not going to be one single one that consistently has an amazing game week in and week out when David Johnson is hurt. I think they will alternate. And the reason I'm bringing up J.J. Nelson is because he is going to be a hot waiver wire pickup. And if anything, you can use his value that he got this week for a potential trade if you'd like. I don't think he will sustain this kind of production. If anyone is going to sustain it, it will be Larry Fitzgerald. Once Brown gets back in that lineup, that's also going to take away a little bit from J.J. Nelson. And to me, it's going to be one of those receivers, like I said, for the Cardinals that blows up every single week. It'll be hard to pinpoint exactly which one. So for now, my advice would be pick up J.J. Nelson and worst case scenario, try and use him as trade bait. Now, going back to our tight ends, a guy that I like is Evan Engram of the Giants. He had 4 receptions for 49 yards and a touchdown. Now, in last night's game, I think it was easy to see Odell still not 100%. And while that is the case, that's going to benefit guys like Evan Engram. I don't expect Odell to be 100% for next week either. He said it himself, it's a 6 to 8 week injury kind of thing. And while he is still hobbled, look for guys like Evan Engram to step up. Brendan Marshall hasn't done anything. Sterling Shepard, somewhat. So I like that safety blanket in Evan Engram for Eli Manning, especially because he's not getting any time from his offensive line. And like I said before, the stat line from Engram, 4 receptions, 49 yards, and a touchdown. He looked good, even though he's a rookie. I like him. And again, maybe a guy that you can capitalize on his value a little bit right now, or someone you can plug in and play while guys like Eifert, Jimmy Graham, or Olsen sit out. Continuing with our tight ends, I know this is a guy that might be owned by a lot of people already, but look at Coby Fleener of the Saints. He had 3 receptions for 33 yards and a touchdown. That's his second straight week of having a touchdown. And I think he probably has one more game left of decent fantasy relevance until Willie Snead comes back. So this next week against the Panthers, I think he'll be a nice little security blanket for Drew Brees, and he'll get peppered with more targets, have a couple more receptions. Not sure about the touchdown front. The Panthers defense has done a very good job of limiting opposing offenses, albeit in the 49ers and the Bills, but still, Coby Fleener, especially for this week before Snead comes back, a nice little option if he is still available. Then I have got my first and last quarterback on this list in Trevor Siemian, and maybe not a name that a lot of people expected going into the season, but looking at his first 2 games, he has played decently well, and especially this week, 231 yards, 4 touchdowns, didn't have a lot of mistakes, and I know the stat line inflated because of the touchdowns, yardage, not necessarily impressive, but things that I do like. Simeon, conservative for the most part, reminds me a little bit of Alex Smith, doesn't make too many mistakes, and has a very good defense behind him. So they'll force turnovers and they will put Simeon in situations where he has a short field and can capitalize on touchdowns. So for me, for that reason, I like Simeon. Maybe stash him as a backup guy, or again as a guy that you can use for a little bit of trade value. kind of like some people did for Alex Smith in week 1. So go ahead, try and get Siemian if you can. Worst case scenario, you can use him as a guy to target on your bye week when your starting quarterback is off. And finally, it would not be a true waiver wire video if I did not include at least one defense. And my defense for this week to pick up is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, I know a lot of people stream defenses, so maybe the Steelers might or might not be available. But in terms of the matchup, I really like their matchup against the Bears, and it might be in Chicago. But look, as long as Glennon is the starting quarterback, and heck, even if it's Mitch Trubisky, it's not going to make much of a difference. The receivers for the Bears cannot catch the ball to save their lives. They've got injuries all across the offensive line for the running backs, for the wide receivers. They are inept on offense, and the Steelers will take advantage of that. I don't care if it's on the road. They will take advantage of a weak Bears offense. And to me, they are the start of the week for the defenses. Now, there's some other defenses that I can mention, but for the most part, I think they'll be all owned. Guys like the Baltimore Ravens versus the Jaguars, but I think the Ravens will be probably owned. And for me, for that reason, the Steelers have a higher chance of being still available. So go ahead and if you can, pick them up. So with that, this concludes my list for this week of week 3 waiver wire guys to target. Let me know, do you guys agree with the names that I listed? Should there be guys that I included but I missed? And also, in terms of my list from last week, let me know, did you guys find that helpful? Did the guys that I listed there help you guys win your matchups? And if not, let me know. Give me your feedback. I love to take it into account as always. And in addition, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in future videos.